when you have players that have gone to pro camps, have maybe experienced a little bit of even NHL exhibition or played a game or two before they come back to juniors, it's so invaluable having that, because for the young guys coming in, like you say, they don't really know, but if they're learning from these guys that set the bar pretty high, then they almost just kind of adopt that mindset of what it's like to be a pro, and I think it's huge.
That was General Manager of the Spokane Chiefs, Matt Bardsley, and you are listening to the Up My Hockey Podcast with Jason Podolak. Just watch me now. Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolak, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolak, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back, or welcome to the Up My Hockey Podcast with Jason Podolak. I am your host, Jason Podolak. This is your home for all things player development. Oftentimes, I like to focus on the intangibles of development and the journey that people can overlook, meaning mindset and the character intangibles that are required to be your best. The idea of peak potential, I think, is something that we should all be seeking, not only as adults, but also obviously as players who have big goals and dreams. And I think that there is such a competitive advantage right now in the marketplace for these intangibles, these intangibles of mindset that are involved in player development. That is an exciting time to do what I do. Lots of interest in the area. It's what's called the blue ocean. There's not many people talking about it or doing it, yet there is a lot of players who are benefiting from it. So it's exciting. And this podcast is really the extension of what I do in my core business, which is help athletes be their best and to help them reach their goals and dreams. And in conversations that you're about to hear, we're able to have some of these discussions with players, either ex-players or people who are currently involved in the game, like Mr. Matt Bardsley is, the general manager of the Spokane Chiefs, and how he goes about looking at an organization and the players within it, who he is trying to recruit, who he wants to be involved in the locker room, and how they go about allowing these players to be the best that they can be. So, having conversations like this, being able to chat about topics that are super relevant and interesting to me, which are also relevant and interesting to you, or else you wouldn't be here, is exciting for me. And this interview, actually, I don't like to call them interviews, to be quite honest. And I like to call them discussions or conversations, because I feel when these are their best, that's what it is. It's just me chatting hockey with somebody else, less interview style and more discussion style. And when we're having these discussions, it's really fun. For me, it's super uplifting. And to be able to talk with somebody like Matt, who's involved in a real historic and traditional team within WHL, the Spokane Chiefs, a team that's super, close to my heart for obvious reasons. For obvious reasons for those who know my story. I was listed by the Spokane Chiefs at 13 years old and ended up playing my first games for them in the playoffs in my 15-year-old season. I had turned 16 at the time, but was still qualified as a 15-year-old, and then to play 4 more years with them, 16, 17, 18, 19, before I turned pro. Very, very special place in my heart, this organization. They treated me well. The people within that organization were great to me. The fans were fantastic to me. The people of the city were great. So to be able to interview Matt here or to have a conversation with Matt was really special. Matt and I don't know each other, just as far as that is concerned. He had seen me play, as he mentions on this in this episode, but we had never crossed paths before. We did have a conversation prior to being on this podcast, just about me potentially working with them in some capacity. To be super transparent, I've always wanted to work with the Chiefs in some way. I thought that would be great with what I do now with the mindset development and the high performance training for athletes. Matt's phone was the first one that I rang, because if there's a team in the WHL that I want to work with, it's the Spokane Chiefs. So we've had some preliminary discussions there. Who knows where that goes? And that's not what this conversation is about. Would love to be able to support them, but neither here nor there. During that initial conversation, I did say to Matt, I was like, hey, would you mind being a guest? I'd love to be able to chat with you. And he was so gracious in the fact that he volunteered his time and shared with us, where his team is at now. His background is quite interesting. You're going to find it very interesting, a very unconventional route to being sitting in the chair where he's at. We talk about the WHL draft quite extensively. How Matt approaches it, what he wants his scouts to be looking for, what are the core tenets of a hockey player that he finds of the utmost importance, and might be something interesting there for some of you, because the thing at the highest piece of the totem pole is where you may not suspect that they are looking. And also talks about the benefits of the character intangibles and how important that is in assessing where these players are at, and at 14 how it's hard to assess that sometimes, because what might be conceived as potentially selfishness or weak mental toughness can sometimes be coming out as just like, that's the competitive nature, like the fire of the athlete is why you're seeing maybe some of this bad body language or some of these outbursts on the ice. And so it's hard to qualify that at times when you're dealing with 14-year-old kids that you're trying to assess as what they're going to be like at 17, 18, 19. So some really interesting discussions. Again, for me, special discussion. The Spokane Chiefs. You're going to see the Spokane emblem there in the background during our interview. Every time I see that, it puts a smile on my face and allows me to reminisce from some of the best times in my hockey career. So this is a discussion you're going to enjoy. Again, anytime you have an opportunity to have 60 minutes with the general manager of a team such as the Spokane Chiefs and the WHL, a place where a lot of players, especially in Western Canada, want to go, is very cool. And I hope you guys enjoy everything that he has to offer. So without further ado, let's bring on Matt Bardsley, general manager of the Spokane Chiefs. The general manager of the Spokane Chiefs, you guys all know that's a pretty special team for me. So I'm excited for this conversation. Welcome to the program, Matt Bardsley.
Hi, Jason. How you doing?
Doing great, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. And it's exciting to talk about the Chiefs. And I know with your history with the team, and I actually remember watching you play with the Chiefs. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, awesome. We seeing that logo behind you there. It was once I got listed at the time I was taken before the draft sort of existed. That logo was like everywhere. I learned how to draw it. It was in the garage where I shot pucks. It was like, I don't know, something about that logo. I always loved it. I think they did a great job with it. It's pretty timeless. One of the best in junior hockey, I think, for sure. So it's always nice when I get to see that logo.
Yeah, no, it is nice. I mean, now that I'm here, I certainly have appreciation for it. I know when I was in other locations, I had a bit of a dislike for it, but now I love it. So it's good.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, we should take maybe a little walk down memory lane, because you and I had an opportunity to chat just previously to us being on air here and your history with Portland. And then we were able to reminisce a little bit about a series that was super memorable for me and maybe not as memorable for the Winterhawk fans. But maybe we'll just start just with your kind of start with the game. And I think that's probably a pretty good introduction to my audience.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's, I'm early on when I started, it was pretty intimidating, but I'm fairly proud of how I got to where I was, because it's very non-traditional route. I was born and raised in San Jose, California, and at the time the Sharks weren't even there, so hockey wasn't much in the city of San Jose. My dad was living in Portland, so I would visit him in the summertime and then at Christmas. And during the Christmas holidays, he would always take me to a Winterhawks game, and that's how I kind of got into hockey. And then eventually down in San Jose or in the States is when ESPN first started picking up NHL. So I started to become a fan. Like I said, I would watch the games when I'd visit my dad. And then eventually I moved to Portland. I moved there in the summer of 1987 and started going to games. Actually, we had season tickets. So during the time that you were playing in Spokane and when you guys were coming to Portland, like that's when I was going to the games. became a real big fan of hockey. And then one of my early jobs was driving a zamboni at the practice rink where the Winterhawks were practicing. So I eventually got into coaching, just youth hockey, started house league, and then eventually up to travel. And the AAA team was going to a tournament in Nanaimo, and I was coaching the AA team. So I got called up for the AAA team as a coach. And one of the local players in Portland, he was there, and a couple teams asked about him. So when I got back to Portland that weekend, I became good friends with Mike Williamson through his time just in Portland. He was the assistant coach for the Winterhawks. And the player that was from the local area, his name is Paul Gostad. And so I just kind of referenced Paul to Mike, and one thing led to another. They listed Paul. And then at that time, they had asked if I'd be interested in scouting because they didn't have anybody working in the States as far as the U.S. players go. They knew that I traveled quite a bit with hockey, with the travel team. And, I thought I hit the lottery. So I was like, sure, I'd love to do that. And that was in 1999. So that was kind of my start, my introduction into it. But again, not playing the game growing up because where I was, it was a little bit intimidating. Because it was just like, well, who's going to believe in me and stuff like that. But, I learned pretty quick. I surrounded myself with really good people, knowledgeable people, tried to be a sponge. And it was great. Like everyone kind of gave me a chance. Listen, I don't know so much my story, but when they kind of asked, oh, where did you play? That's where early on I was kind of nervous. Oh, I didn't. And they're like, well, how'd you get this? But it was quite the opposite. So that's how I started with hockey, my background, but I started with Portland in 99 and actually worked with the team for 19 years. So
that's awesome. I want to lean into that just a little bit and wasn't expecting to go there. I knew you had a little bit of I don't know what the right word is, humble, I guess, beginning or a grassroots beginning. But there's some type of confidence or some type of fire that has to be within you or a passion for it to do that, right? 'Cause you're putting yourself in an uncomfortable environment. Everyone knows that the hockey world is kind of a close-knit, old school kind of frat boy scenario, like everyone's kind of been around the game or whatever. So you're coming in there as a guy that grew up in California, and now you're rubbing shoulders and elbows with these guys that have probably been around their game their whole lives. What was the reason for you, or like the fire there that allowed you to get that uncomfortable and do what you were doing?
Yeah, I think, well, you're right about the passion part of it. Like, I just absolutely loved hockey. I mean, whether it was watching it, listening to it, like even the broadcast when the team was on the road, like if I wasn't, at the time I wasn't working with the team, but I would always, tune into every game. So I just became a huge fan of it. And certainly at the time I wasn't thinking about a career of it, but I just thought, how can I stay involved? I knew it wasn't going to be as a player and certainly wasn't going to be as a coach. But I enjoyed going to the games. I enjoyed, just watching players play. And, maybe I felt a little bit like, well, maybe I can identify players or something like that. And then once I got that opportunity with Portland, it just went to a whole nother level where it's just, I just absolutely loved it. And then you start to, maybe you find a player that winds up playing and they're just like, oh, this kind of confirms maybe this is something I can do and stuff like that. I had great mentors, like Ken Hodge was unbelievable, gave me my first opportunity. A lot of people around the organization. Probably where it really changed is when Mike Johnston and Travis Green came in, because Mike gave me a lot of ownership in my role with the team. And at the same time, wherever we went, Mike always made sure to introduce me to the people, and he's so well connected. And that really gave me a lot of confidence because once you start meeting guys, especially, whether it was coaches or management or people that you see on TV and, they just treat you like another person, that really gave me a lot of confidence. Because, again, I was probably a little bit insecure going in that, once I'm waiting for that question, oh, where did you play or what have you done and stuff like that, and how you're going to be responded to with it. So I was a little bit insecure going in, but then I, started getting really confident as I started to meet people, and being part of a successful organization really, really helps too. We had a pretty good run there in Portland. So.
Yeah, no, you guys had some really strong teams and some hard teams to play against. That's for sure. The validation of there's two words that kind of came to my mind there when you were talking. Well, one is in that scouting capacity, the proof for you, I guess, and for your peer group is identifying the players, right? It's one thing to be on the road and watching, right? But I guess that would have been sort of your testing ground to see what you see, right? And then having that voice at the table and having those players come up. The other thing that I was thinking of is the word confidence that you used a ton of times. And isn't that such a crazy word? Because, like you're experiencing it there and as a scout and being in a new environment. And then with what I do and working with the players all the time, like that's the word that comes up all the time, right? Like I want more confidence, or I need more confidence, or I have a hard time maintaining a consistent level of confidence. And it's hard when you're sending players to an area that they've never been to before, right? So, I mean, you guys have that every year, right? There's new players coming into the league. They've never played a shift in that league before. They've never scored a goal in that league before. They've been hockey players, yes, but they've never proven themselves or even know what to expect at that level. And it's hard to walk into those environments sometimes, or harder for some people than others, with that C word, confidence. How do you remain confident? Is there kind of a little bit of a side trek, I guess, but is there a way, or your coaching staff, like when you bring in these younger players or rookies to the organization, that allow them to feel confident and comfortable?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, and it's a word that's probably used quite a bit, but it is your culture, right? In your room. And, you want to get to a spot where you walk into the room and it feels like, okay, this is a pro environment, even if we're in juniors. But, when through my experiences, seeing teams that, when you have players that have gone to pro camps, have maybe experienced a little bit of even NHL exhibition or played a game or two before they come back to juniors, it's so invaluable having that, because for the young guys coming in, like you say, they don't really know, but if they're learning from these guys that set the bar pretty high, then they almost just kind of adopt that mindset of what it's like to be a pro. And I think it's huge. And then that just breeds confidence. And you're just seeing it more and more now, today's athletes. I mean, there's so much more information out there when they are 14, 15. I think, a big thing we try to do is, once a player, if he's committed to us, he's signed a standard player agreement, he comes in. We always try to make sure we bring them in during the season if we can. And then once their season ends, bring them up for the end of our season, hopefully playoffs. And they just get a bit of that experience. They understand the routine. So when they come in the following year, instead of maybe waiting till the end of October, early November, that they start to feel confident. They've already got a bit of an idea of what to expect. They've got a relationship with the staff. They know some of their teammates. So when they come to camp, they're almost hitting the ground running. But again, that comes from confidence, because, I think you want them to feel confident, but it's also part of our responsibility is developing players to foster an environment where they're going to feel confident. So.
Yeah, I think for me, and just my experience with it, and again, we're talking decades ago now, but going to new places, the communication was super lacking back in the day, right? Like, just as far as like what the expectation was for the player as an individual, or even what the routine was, or even like the welcome, hey, we really want you here. Like any of those things, like, just didn't exist. Like that whole kind of the personal side of the game, it was, especially at the pro level, it was all about, you kind of being an asset, and, don't get too comfortable with the asset. That's the way it kind of felt, right? But I think these young men and women, I mean, they want to know where they stand, what the rules are, what the expectations are, why they're there. Those types of things I think help with the comfort level, and coaching staff seem to do a much better job of that these days, of making people feel comfortable when they walk through the doors. And they're also understanding more that the elder leaders, right, like the older veterans, as you say, like they play a role in that too, right? Walking across the room, shaking hands, making sure that they know their name, taking them out for lunch, or these types of things. So there's to that word of yours, culture. I mean, I love hearing that, because that's that really where it starts and where it stops is where the coaches want to handle it, and also how those veteran players in the room handle it. That's where the standards are set. We got to go back to that series. So Portland, Spokane. I know that you weren't necessarily involved in it, but you were kind of watching that one, and that was that was just wild. And I think I may have told it on this podcast before, but I don't really know why I would have actually. But it was my last year. So I was 96. It was the first year in the new building, or that one that you're still in right now, that looks exactly like it did when it was built. It's crazy how well they've maintained that thing. Right. But it was like this brand new building in Spokane. They just got rid of the Boone Street barn, held 10,000 people. We had a great team that year. Like we're selling out lots, 10,500 was in there consistently. And we ran into Portland in the first round of the playoffs. We were the number one ranked team in the CHL. Portland was the 6th seed, the way they did the playoffs then. And before you know it, we were down 3-0 to Portland. Bielecki was hot. That goalie was playing really well. And they were scrappy and they were a good team. But like we were kind of just shocked. And at that point, man, I know you told you that last time we talked, but for those listening, there was going to be history made either way because a 1 seed had never lost to a 6 seed at that point in the WHL playoffs. And no team in WHL history ever had come back from down 3-0. So like the standard was set, right? And it was this crazy scenario. And the one thing I never told, Mike Babcock was our coach at the time. And I think everyone probably who follows hockey in any capacity now knows who Mike Babcock is, went on to win Olympics, gold medals, and coach of the Leafs and now coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Anyways, he was our coach at the time, and Babs was like, it was interesting because you obviously now hire coaches and you look for different personality types, and Babs was one of the most prepared coaches. He was one of the most confident guys. He had a swagger to him for sure. He had a dry sense of humor. There wasn't nothing too cuddly about him. He did his job. He did it really well. But I was, I can say that now. I was his guy that year, right? Like I was the guy that kind of stirred the drink in Spokane, but he never really treated me like that. Like I wasn't having any meetings with him. Like he'd never bring me in, ask me how the team was doing or how I was doing. And, which I saw in different other points in my career. So he was hands off with me. But then we're down 3-0 and he grabs me out of the locker room. It was after pregame skate before game 4. And he legitimately put his arm around my shoulder, walking down the hallway. We were in we were in the hallway there, and he says, "Jason," he goes, "this team needs you. You got to put us on your back, and we're gonna ride you the whole way." And it was like, for me, like it was crazy. You talk about that word confidence. Like I'd never heard that from him, like never, right? Like that I was important, that I was valuable, that he wanted me. That the team needed me. Of course, I knew it subconsciously, but not like that in your face, right? Like, let's go, And boy, I think that lit a huge fire because for me personally, that was like the best run I ever had. I had like 21 goals in 16 games after that. And we ended up coming back. We won game 6 in double OT, game 7 in overtime. There's people lined up outside the building. It was the loudest building I'd ever been in. And anyways, Portland was scrappy, and they could have won that series very, very easily. Obviously, when you go to double overtime games, and we ended up running to the WHL final that year and never got to the Memorial Cup, unfortunately. But anyways, that was just like epic. Like, as far as, when you have your stories, right? Like, and you've had a long career now, like there's some things that just stick out. Like that series for me and that whole run was just so crazy. What was it like on the other side of that? Was it pretty heartbreaking for the group?
Well, yeah, again, I was at that time, I was more of a fan than I was working, but I was, certainly a passionate fan. And I remember going to those games, and if I'm correct, wasn't game 4 in Portland?
Yeah.
And that,
I'm not sure how, but it was. I was going to say that. Maybe my memory's off on that, but it was.
Yeah. And I remember I think that was a pretty close game, but you guys won that game, and I'm like, all right, well, it's 3-1. Okay, and then you guys win again. Okay, well, it's 3-2. And if I'm not mistaken, I thought game 6, when it went to double overtime, was it Richard Zednick that maybe thought he scored, or was there like a wave off of a goal that was waved off in overtime that maybe Portland thought they won? I thought I remember something like that. I could be wrong. I could be wrong on my timelines or whatever, but I thought there was an instance there where there was a
I think
chance.
it was Game 7, Matt. Now that you're bringing that up, I think that
Oh,
was Game 7. Yeah,
okay.
and I think it was in overtime, and I think there was some controversy of what happened. I can't remember exactly what it was, but then Darren Sinclair scored after. So, of course,
Right.
when you're on the winning end of that, that's completely nullified, and you don't necessarily remember the details of that. But yeah, Zednik was a beast, man. He was so hard to play against. Big, strong European player. He was really a big problem for us and a thorn in our side. And but yeah, I remember skating around before Game 7 because we were down in the locker room's obviously in the same spot as it is now. So we were sitting in there before Game 7 started, and they were playing the highlights on the big screen above, right before the game started of the series, right? And so of our double overtime goal in Game 6 and all these other big moments, and the crowd was going bonk, like it was crazy. It was honestly bedlam. And when we went out before the game, like before the anthem, I was skating beside my buddy Sean Gillum, who was, I believe, our captain that year, and like screaming at him from like 6 inches away, and like we couldn't hear each other. Like that was how loud that building was. It was so cool. And so I've seen Spokane in that way, you know, like the fans there are passionate, they care. There's a lot of excitement around our team and about the rink, obviously. So we had a few other things that were going for us that year. But boy, what a great place for teenagers to play! Like it was so fun.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, you know, last year was my first year in Spokane. You're right, the building's unbelievable. You know, I was probably a little spoiled because during my time working with the Winterhawks, we played a lot of our games. One, it was the Rose Garden, then it changed to the Moda Center, but it was like an NHL type facility. So whenever I would travel with the team and come into Spokane, it was a nice building, but you never really thought too much about it because, you know, we're so used to, you know, the Rose Garden. But now that I'm here and I'm in it every day, like for me, it's one of the best buildings in the league. And like you said, you would think you wouldn't think it's 30 years old. It's, you know, feels like it's 10 years old, but the city does a great job putting money back into the building to maintain it, keep it modern looking. It's a multi-purpose event. I mean, we get a lot of concerts, a lot of shows. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the building, but they really do an unbelievable job of maintaining it. The fans are incredible, much like what you experienced. I mean, you know, we certainly had a tough year this year, but we still finished second in the league in attendance. So it's quite impressive. So I feel very fortunate to be here, and you know, I know we're kind of branching off, but even on a personal level for a family, I have a 7-year-old daughter, a 4-year-old son, and we absolutely love it here. We're in a great spot. A great area for schools, a lot to do for the kids. It's a great community. Like we feel really blessed to be here. It's a great spot. And I know you were here for a while and you got to experience it too. So
yeah, I know it is a fantastic area. The only thing, and not like, because everything was awesome. The schools were awesome. Everything was great, but it's so big. Like as far as like it's widespread, right? I remember like I lived in the valley. And a lot of my guys were building up on the north side there, right? And so like that drive is like 30 minutes, you know. And for me, coming from a small town, it felt like an hour, you know. It was like, oh my God, this is so far away. But no, I love what they've done with the downtown area. That now it's like been revitalized. Like Spokane is definitely a cool place to play. And yeah, it was really fun to experience those 4 years there. All right, let's take a short break from the conversation with Matt to remind you that Up My Hockey is more than a podcast. Up My Hockey is a training system, a mental performance training system for athletes, for players who want to do big things, who have big goals and big dreams, and who want to be their best. And to maybe to this point in their journey, haven't really considered what mindset is, how it's going to help, and why I need it. And if you are one of those, if you are somebody who does want to be your best, this is the competitive advantage you are looking for. Up My Hockey can provide programs from U11, U13, all the way up the ranks that will give you a taste of how you can fine tune what's going on between your ears to serve you best, whether that means from a practice habit standpoint, whether that means from a time management standpoint, whether that means preparation, recovery from mistakes, resiliency, belief systems, self-esteem, confidence. All these things are wrapped into something that I call mindset. And there are ways that you can learn about some of these tools, strategies, and ideas, and definitely ways you can execute on them. And I think that for me is one of the differentiations of Up My Hockey and why it's different, is because one, I've been there. I know what it's like to chase a pro hockey career. I know what it's like to play at the highest level. I know what it's like to be a highly touted junior prospect. And I know the pressures that are associated with that, of moving away from home. I know what these players are going through. And I also know some of the gaps in the development process that exist. And there is areas where generally people aren't filling the holes. And I believe it's the biggest competitive advantage available. The other execution piece that Up My Hockey differentiates itself with is what I just said there, is execution. Everything that I do with players gets them to execute, gets them to move forward, gets them to try a new action or a new strategy or a new tool. Nothing is theoretical. Everything is practical, and everything is something that they can apply to their game or to their day as soon as they start working with me. And I think that's a big piece, because the big piece of that is now they are applying, now they are tweaking, now they are seeing results, now they're building their self-esteem and their confidence, and they are feeling empowered about what is to come. So if you are somebody that is listening, that has a player that wants to be their best, has big goals and dreams, if this is something that you haven't explored yet, you understand mindset is a key component of success, and regardless of what you do, perhaps this is something you want to look at. Again, I've shared this on different podcasts. Not only do I like helping individual players, but really the overall business goal and the where I think the most impact can be made is with organizations in general, or associations or academies, where an academy can step in, use Up My Hockey and the programs that I've developed, along with the coaching, and all athletes within that space have access to key tools that will help them be better. It takes the onus off the coaches. It takes the onus off the parents and off the managers of the teams to try and supply this type of training and this type of practice, and is a done for you turnkey approach. So if you are in that market space, if you are somebody who's an influencer in that market space, by all means, let the decision makers know that Up My Hockey is something that they could consider. And on the heels of that, if you are a GM or a coach of a team, and maybe the association is too big of a step to make, or too big of a reach, then I can work with your team, or one of my coaches can work with your team this season, walk you through the Peak Potential Hockey Project. It turns out to be an 8-week program. It is a massively advantageous culture builder. Not only, again, from an individual standpoint, where your players be better, more well adapted, more ready to step into their greatness, but your team will have a different set of language and a different set of criteria and standards that they will be looking at for the season. So it does help you with more wins. It also helps you minimize problems within the dressing room and some of these distractions that can come up throughout the year. So if that sounds interesting to you, by all means, reach out. upmyhockey.com is where you will find that. And I would love to get on a call and see if we would be a good fit for supporting either your association, your team, or your individual player. Now let's get back to the conversation with Matt Bardsley. You mentioned it was a tough year last year. I mean, I don't know exactly where they finished in the standings, but it wasn't where I know you guys wanted to. But how do you look at that from a GM's position now? Like, what is the outlook? How do you build on last year? And is there like a long-term 3 or 4 year play that you're trying to work at, or what is the way to get back to the playoffs and winning more than you're losing?
Yeah, I think for me, when I got hired, it was kind of interesting, because the year before I got hired, I was working for Philadelphia as an amateur scout, and my main focus was in the Western League. So, Spokane had a couple of players up for the draft, so I probably followed the team. I probably watched Spokane 10 to 12 times that year. So when I wound up getting this opportunity to go through the interview, I had a bit of an idea as far as just the roster goes. So coming in, I kind of had a bit of an idea where we were. At the same time, you got to be realistic too. Like within the division itself, Seattle was an incredible team, and we knew they were going to be loading up. Kamloops was hosting, so it seemed like every every cycle when the Western League team is hosting, there's going to be 3 or 4 other teams that probably feel they're right there. So usually in the league that hosts that year, the teams start to load up. So, we talked last year with our team, like we could have added some players to our roster that would have certainly helped. We might have gained another 5 to 7 wins. I don't know if that would have changed anything as far as playoffs go, but the one thing it certainly would have changed was it would have delayed where we're eventually trying to get to, because we would have had to move some draft picks, maybe even a young player to bring in an older player. So trying to be a little bit realistic where it is, it's, and it's tough for some of the older players too, because, they want to win. We always want to win, but there's that balance of winning, but also developing, and we want to do it the right way. So to answer your question, I thought, the one thing I was proud of, I tried to take the positive out of a really tough year, but in the second half of the season, we were second in the Western Conference for the increase in winning percentage. It might not have shown much. I mean, it doesn't mean we went from a 250 winning percentage to a 800 winning percentage, but the point being is how much we improved in the second half. And really that wasn't because we added players. It's just we started seeing the team develop. It was kind of new for everybody. You have a new general manager. Our head coach, he was the interim head coach for the last month and a half the year before. So now this is his first year being a head coach. We brought in an associate coach from the Quebec League. So it was his first year in the Western League. And then we had our other assistant coach, Dustin Donaghy. He had been kind of a part-time coach, but last year was his first full-time. So there's a lot, everything for, and that's, that can be tough for players when all of a sudden you have different voices, different mindsets. Maybe, you have to kind of adapt to that. So I thought our players did a real good job of battling through that, sticking with, we talk about sticking with the process, so to speak. They did, but we started to see some really good, our players develop. Again, kind of knowing where we were within our division and even in the conference, it was going to be tough. But I really liked the way we finished the year. And then just kind of going from there. Like we were the second youngest team in the league, and Jason, you've played in the league too. And, but usually the older teams probably have a chance somewhat of winning, so to speak, just kind of the way it goes. So we knew we were in tough there, but now we're collectively a year older. Some of those teams we talked about before, they are graduating players. I mean, when you have teams that have 12 or 13 players at the 19 and 20-year-old age group, just by default, they're going to be they can only keep 3 of those, right? So there's going to be a bit of a change there. So I think this year the goal, without looking too far ahead, but we need the playoff experience. Where we eventually want to go, we need playoff experience. I think any teams that have success or have a chance to win, they have to have some playoff experience. So that's our focus this year, but without skipping steps, we want to do the right things to earn that opportunity to get into the playoffs. But I believe we have that with our coaching staff, with our players. I believe we can get there. The long-term vision, playoffs this year. I believe the following year we can compete for the division. And then in that third year, I think we can compete for the conference. And it just so happens to be that year is when the Memorial Cup comes back to the Western League. And now they've opened it back up to the U.S. teams. Like this year in the OHL is hosting, and Saginaw was awarded the bid, or they'll be hosting. So I believe we have a chance to compete for the league in that third year, and kind of what the plan is. Right. We've accumulated a lot of draft picks. Like we have 19 draft picks in the first 4 rounds over the next 3 years. So as I've told our players, I told some of the media, we didn't acquire all these draft picks so we could, select, 19 players in the draft in the first 4 rounds, but part of that is I think we can use that to add impact players without sacrificing the draft itself. So I believe we're in a good spot. There is the plan. Now we've got to execute the plan.
Yeah, no, excellent. That sounds exciting. Like you got a good eye on what's going on there. And I would assume that, like the NHL teams, like the path forward, and maybe even more so actually at the WHL level, it is through the draft, right? Like the importance of, where you came from and watching these players in the arenas and making the right picks and hopefully those picks pay off. I would assume that's a pretty high priority item for you as the GM now, is making sure you identify the right players for the Spokane Chiefs.
Well, you do. I mean, at the end of the day, the draft, like I said, the NHL, certainly the Western League, whenever there's a draft, that's the lifeline of your team. That's where you build your teams. You can certainly fill in through trades, or I know, like you said, when you came into the organization, the draft wasn't there yet. So there was basically a listing process. So there still is the listing process. But at the end of the day, it starts with the draft. And I think what's important for teams, and in my belief, my philosophy, our philosophy, is there's a template of what you want in a player. And it kind of starts a little bit how we want to play. So we need those type of players. I know when I started to understand more, I think I always thought it was interesting that, maybe teams wanted to play a certain way, but they didn't acquire those type of players. And even coaching is so big. If you wanted to play a certain way, but maybe you hire a coach that's not their strength. Maybe they want to play a certain way. So I think everything has to be lined up together. You want to play a certain way, but you also have to make sure that your coaching staff aligns with that. And, and that's their strengths. You want to make sure you're matching the strengths with the strengths. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I had a couple conversations with some NHL scouts, and I do think that there's definitely, credibility there with what you're saying, and the fact that, like, you're with the Flyers, for instance, like there's a traditional blue collar, hard nosed, hard edge team, and yes, those teams still need skill, right? Yeah. Like, so you're still looking for skill, but there's still a brand about the Flyers that the Flyers will always probably be that type of team, because that's the type of team that those fans want to come watch, right? So sure. I would assume, like, you wearing the hat of a Flyers scout, that's the type of player you're looking for. These gritty, edgy, hard to play against players. That would be a higher priority for the Flyers than maybe, say, I don't know, whatever, fill in the blank on whatever other team in the NHL, right? And sure. You're kind of saying that same thing now. And when you come in there with your hat on as the GM of the Spokane Chiefs, is there a way that Matt Bardsley wants the Spokane Chiefs to look and play like? What type of players do you find attractive?
Well, and it sounds probably very generalized, but I mean, there are kind of the four basics. You certainly want guys that can skate. You want guys that compete, guys that have skill, and guys that have hockey sense. I mean, for me, those are the four staples that you want. I think in today's game now, we really value the hockey sense portion, and not to say that, if you can't skate and you don't have skill and you don't compete, that's fine. I mean, you have to have those qualities, but I think hockey sense is probably the hardest thing to teach. I always it's interesting. I mean, you've got skill coaches, you have skating coaches, you have strength coaches, you have mental performance coaches, but there's no hockey sense coach, right? It's just one of those things that you kind of have it. I think you can certainly get better understanding the game. You can learn the game with video, being a student of the game. I do believe as you get older through the league, the game probably becomes a little bit easier, maybe even slows down for you a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's, to have that hockey sense, some players just have it. Some guys are at elite level the way they think the game. But those are kind of the four areas, our criteria that we look for. Character is a huge piece as well, and that's more so, you can certainly see that a little bit as you're watching a game, but that's where it's imperative that our scouts are doing a lot of the behind the scenes work. They're talking to coaches, they're talking to parents, they're talking, just using your resources to get information about the player, the individual. You can certainly see things on the ice. I think sometimes you can misread a player's character too, because sometimes the players that are so driven, it's just their emotion. They slam a stick, they, whatever, they're on their teammates. As long as it's coming from a good place, but sometimes from afar, we can watch players say, he has bad character. But then you talk to the coach, you talk to other people, say, no, don't mistake in that. Don't mistake in that for some sort of weakness. He's just so driven. He's not mad at his teammates. He's expecting the best. So I think you you certainly have to make sure you're doing your homework on individuals. But kind of, I guess, the long version of what you asked there. Yeah, we want to play a certain way. These are the things that we need. The one thing we really talk about, Jason, is we want to draft. Like when it comes to drafting, we want to draft top 6 forwards, top 4D, a starting goaltender. And that's not to say that bottom 6 forwards are not valuable. But what I would rather have our philosophy is, if he doesn't happen to become a top 6 forward, then we feel he's got all those qualities. He's going to be a really good bottom 6 forward, rather than trying to draft a bottom 6 forward. And if he doesn't quite reach that, then he's probably not on our team. So we kind of have a bit of a guideline of what we're looking for, and that's how we kind of do our focus. We want top 6, top 4 starting goaltender, and then if, like I said, if they don't quite reach that, we know that there's still a spot for them on the team, that they're going to be really good. Yeah,
interesting. I love that philosophy and that insight. Thanks for sharing that. Because the trickle down could definitely happen. I guess when you're dealing with those 4 quadrants, if we're going to generalize them, usually the top 6 guys would have high skill, right? They would probably be high in the hockey IQ quotient. They'd be higher on the skating side, and then maybe if there was one of the 4 quadrants for you, there might be the compete level that could be maybe a little bit lower, right? With those top 6 guys.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny, right? Because like that's when I'm watching guys like that compete level, and again, it's like what you're watching. Sometimes that is so. Like it's so powerful when you watch somebody that really competes hard. Like he can make up for a lot of different things, and then those guys are like, those guys are obviously supply some value too. And I know you're not. You said that compete is a huge thing for you guys, and along with character. And I think those kind of go side by each too, right? Because those sometimes are the guys that drive the bus.
For sure. Well, and I think in the compete, it can be a pretty broad spectrum too. Like sometimes people, maybe when they say compete, this guy just goes and runs guys over, he's competitive. Yeah. That's certainly one aspect, but competing for on the boards, let's say you lose the puck, how's his puck retrieval, or trying to get the puck back, does he just let somebody else do it? Even in faceoffs, he's competitive in faceoffs. He's going to be. So I think there's so many different levels that can branch off from the word compete. Doesn't necessarily have to be a guy that just goes so hard. You can work really, really hard, but maybe you're not even being effective that way. But compete is very important. You need that in today's game, but also with today's game, we watch it. There's so much skill. The skating's unreal. And that's where I think the hockey sense is really important, because the game's so much faster. So, you have to think quick. I believe that a hockey sense, in my personal opinion, even a hockey sense can make up for a little bit of lack of skill or a lack of skating. But if you can anticipate the game, where to go, stuff like that, I think that can trump a lot of areas that maybe is not great. And I try to remind our scouts, say, guys, like, if you think his skating is a little bit subpar, but his hockey sense is elite, like, let's really look into this player, because we can work on skating. We can work on some of these things with that player. So, but yeah, that's a little bit of our mindset. That's our philosophy. And, people may hear that and then see where we finished and say, well, gee, that's not working so well right now. But I believe you stick with it. You eventually build the teams that you want. And that's why we're excited, because I think, we have some of that with our veteran players, and then with our young guys that we've recently drafted, we see a lot of those qualities. And then part of that, just them gaining experience in the league.
Yeah. So. I love you talking about competitiveness. That's exactly one of the things that I work on with players is like their personal identity, right? Like their player profile, how they be their best. And that competitiveness is so broad. And I think players do miss that aspect, right? You can be really competitive. And one of the guys that I like talking about and shining a light on is Kyler Yamamoto. So another ex-Spokane Chief, right? Here's a small player, right? Like not physically intimidating at all, but not one person in the world can say he's not competitive, right? Like he doesn't intimidate because he's going to blow you up, but he is going to fight for that puck, second, third, fourth chances, right? Like he doesn't go away. He's first to the puck in the corners. He'll go to the dirty areas, right? And He'll get to the front of the net. He'll win those loose puck battles. He's hard on the back check. And so I love highlighting like smaller players like that, because we have this traditional idea of what competitiveness means, but there's lots of ways to be competitive as long as you understand that as the person within your own stature, within your role, what your skill set, where your skill set's strong. And then all of a sudden when you have these areas of action items, of how I can show my competitiveness, I think sometimes it's a big light switch for players, right? Like how they can and how they can compete. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a really great point for my listeners out there. As far as GM and with the draft, and actually I should have a little sidebar. I know I joked with you the other day, like Hudson, for those listening, is my oldest. He's an 09. He is going into his WHL draft year, and he's playing at rink prep this year, and he's a pretty good player. I think he has a good chance of getting drafted. We'll see how the season goes. But he definitely wants to play for the Spokane Chiefs. So it's funny for everyone out there, like with all these picks in the first 4 rounds, like we'll see if he has a good enough year and catches Matt's eye. But kind of fun, right? For me now coming back through this a second time, but with the father right. hat on, it's a whole new thing. And it's fun to watch your kids chase something, just like I was chasing it when I was his age. He definitely wants to play in the WHL, and I know there's so many kids now that have such a big emphasis, and these players are 14 years old. Lots can happen between 14 and 17 when most of them will play. There's lots of guys that aren't quite hitting that stride yet on the development curve, and that's why the list process still exists, and that it's not the end of the world, this WHL draft. It's just one day in time, but they definitely are motivated. They're working their tails off. They want to get seen. And I guess my question behind all that is, with the draft, where do you fit with that role of GM? Are you making the final call on the first few picks? Do you need to see the players? Is it completely up to the scouts, or how does that work inside the inner sanctum of the Spokane Chiefs?
Yeah, so what we have this year, we did it last year, we're going to do it again this year, is we have a head guy in each province. So we have a head scout in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. We have some coverage in the U.S. as well. With my background of the scouting side, I still like to be involved in that. For the most part, I want our scouts to feel confident and make decisions. Sometimes, like this year, we had the 3rd overall pick, so I certainly had a big say in what we were going to do, the direction we were going to go with that, because that's such an important pick, and not that other ones are not. But our scouts are the ones that do all the groundwork. They're watching the player, as I talked about earlier. They're kind of doing a deep dive on the individual, getting to know them a little bit. I think our guys do a really good job of building relationships with the families, and I think it's really important, because much as we want to know about them, at the end of the day, you also want the families to understand who we are as well. And just like you're going to go through it, Jason, with your son, you want your son in a good environment, a place where he's going to develop. Everything's going to be good. And I think all the teams do that. So that's great. But our scouts, like I said, they do a lot of the work. So am I involved? I am involved for sure. What I try to do is we have, monthly Zoom calls with our staff to kind of go over the list. And basically, I look at the list, and then I just try to focus on the top 30, 40 players and just get a really good feel from there. And then with the rest of the draft. And the way it works is we set our list, and then we pretty much just follow our list. So instead of jumping around, and I feel our guys do they spend a lot of time, they sacrifice a lot of their time, because they all have their families and their job as well. So we set the list, and then when it's our turn to pick the next guy that's on our list, that's who we're taking. Now, the only time that may change is if it just so happened to be our first 3 picks wound up being forwards, and let's say we need a defenseman, but the next guy on our list is a forward, maybe we skip that player to get that defenseman. Yeah. But for the most part, we follow our list from the top. So sometimes at the draft, guys might think it's a little bit boring, because it's almost like an auto draft, so to speak, know, but I feel we're drafting on the best player available in our eyes. Is there a point where we have a need? For sure. But at the end of the day, we don't really want to be, skipping over a player, and all of a sudden we skip 10 guys just to get to a guy that, we kind of like this player because that's a need. we can fill in from that. But so yes, I am involved. I want to be involved. But for the most part, I try to let our scouts, they do a lot of the work. And again, if we're following the list, then I'm trusting our guys that this is what they believe in, and making sure that they understand, the philosophy that we're looking for in a player and how we want to play.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the third overall pick there, and maybe we should give a shout out to Mathis Preston. I'm sure you're willing to trumpet him since you took him in that high spot. I mean, he was somebody that I had a chance to watch, and again, I didn't watch as many games as everyone else did, but from what I saw, I thought that he has the highest impact probability, and I mean like in a big way. Like he's a heck of a player, and he could be an amazing player. Like I think he could have went first overall quite easily, and I think you got a pretty special player there. What did you like about Preston's game?
Well, he's certainly, when we talked earlier about the 4 things that we look for in a player, I thought, he checked the box quite easily. He can absolutely skate. He's got an incredible shot. His skills are really good. Sees the game really well, and he's got a compete level that's for the type of player that he is. Some people think he's skilled, which he is, but he's got an element of his compete where it's pretty impressive. He can almost play the game any way you want. However the game's going that night, he can adapt to it. If it's going to be a shootout, then that's what we're doing. And if it's a physical game, then he's right in the thick of it. I think he has a lot of everything, and we were really, really excited. And I agree with you. I think he's a special player. And talk about someone that's really driven. He's just he's a pretty serious person, even at 14. Like he knows what he wants to do and what he wants to be. Yeah. And a lot of times he'll drag his teammates into the battle too, which I think is pretty impressive.
That's awesome. All right, let's take another short break from the podcast just to say thank you. The podcast has been running now, 118 episodes, something crazy like that. You keep me motivated. You keep me rolling. You people who are listening and send me those text messages and thank me for the insights and the training videos and everything that comes along with the podcast, the content that it creates, and the discussions that it allows you to have either with your mom or dad or with the parents, with their players. The thoughts and the discussions that are spurred from this, I think, are excellent, and you are the ones that allow me to keep rolling and keep pushing through when sometimes it seems a little bit tough. So I'm always grateful for the discussions. This one was definitely no different. Leave revved up, leave charged up after having the opportunity to speak with my guests. They leave me in a better place. It makes me think about things that potentially I haven't thought before, how I can serve my players better, the teams I work with better, and really expands my knowledge. And I know it's doing the same thing for you. And it also connects me to what I'm doing on the other side of this podcast, which is trying to be the best coach I can be that allows players and teams to be the best that they can be. And every little bit of knowledge, every bit of assimilation with knowledge from different people, different approaches, different mentors. And that's essentially what I consider all my guests really are mentors. I am very grateful to be in a position every week to speak with great hockey people that have their own journey, their own philosophies, their own ways of looking at things, and anything I can grab or any piece that I can use to expand what I'm doing, I'm definitely grateful for, and I know that my athletes are benefiting from that as well. So for you who have listened, and whether you've listened to one episode or all 118, I hope that it's helped you become more knowledgeable with the game, help you give you a broader understanding of the journey and what you can do for your player. If you're a player, how you can help. I definitely love when I hear that players are listening to these. Like, boy, if you are somebody that loves hockey and you want to grow and you want to be your best, this is a really great resource for you to be able to pick up and get inside the brains of some of these scouts and some of these general managers and coaches and ex-players that are giving you tidbits and insights about what it takes to make it, what it takes to be great, what you're going to have to overcome, how you're going to do it, how to persevere. This is gold. There's a lot of gold in here if you're willing to listen for it. So thanks for being a part of the journey, my own journey through this space. of being a performance coach and supporting this podcast. And again, if you are listening and anything you can do to expand the reach of the podcast is not only helping the players that you expand it to, but it's also helping me and helping me touch more players and giving them these valuable insights. So thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this point, and I will get you back to the conversation with Matt Bardsley right now. Maybe walk us through the development aspect. So you get drafted by the Spokane Chiefs. Of course, there's the contract that can be signed. Doesn't have to be signed right away. Some guys do, some guys don't. What happens at that point? Like, is there any type of, program that they're given? Do you help with the decision of where they're going to play next year? Do you want to get involved in that? Like, what happens between the time that you draft somebody and they have the opportunity to potentially actually wear the jersey of the Spokane Chiefs?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, like we talked about during the season, our scouts do a good job of building relationships with the families. So when it comes to the point that if we were to draft that player, I'd like to believe that the family feels really comfortable because we've already built a relationship. And then from there, we really continue to build onto that relationship until they come to training camp. So that way, when they come to camp, it's almost like they feel like, well, we kind of know you. And that's what we talk about. As much as we're evaluating them, it allows them to evaluate us. Because I think that's the most important thing for them, because we've got a bit of a feel of who they are as a player. We'll get to know a little bit more as a person. But I think for the families, as you know, Jason, I mean, you spend up to 8, potentially 9 months, well, probably more 7, 8 months in that city as a parent. You want to know where your son's going to be potentially over the next 4 or 5 years. So that's what we try to do. We really tried to build the relationships. Obviously, some of our players have already signed. Others haven't, and that's not because we don't think that they're not going to play for us. But I feel pretty confidently that if we're going to sign a player, I want to make sure that there's a spot for them. There's an opportunity. Even if that means there's been a few over the years where we've laid it out there, even at 15, say, look, we'd like to commit to you. You may need one more year at 16, but for sure you're coming in at 17. And in my office right behind me on that board there, if I open it up, I've got a depth chart for this year, for the following team, or the following year, and then the year after that. So there's a 3-year where I've got a depth chart. So we can see where we're at in our age group, in our positions, where we need to fill in. So if I'm going to commit to a player, I want to be able to let that player and the parents know that we have a spot. Even if that means it's not till 17, but the thing we're willing to do is commit to them and commit to their education right off the hop. And so that's kind of what we start to work on. And then, we just have communication throughout the summer to see how their training's going, any assistance they need as far as just, where they need help at. And then same thing with our strength coach. He's in touch with all of our players, our veteran players, but also the players that have signed, just to kind of check in to see how their strength training is going, stuff like that. And then once they come to camp, that's when we really get to, again, build that relationship. They get a bit of an idea of everything. So
with the development side of it, like the player development side, is there I don't know how to put it. I mean, I know you're not hands-on with them because they're playing for another team, right? They have another coach and they're with another organization when they're 15, 16, 14, 15. Well, that 1 year, I guess, for sure. Your top players are going to come up and play at 16. And I know there's only 1 or 2 probably a year that do that. But you still have that 1 year, that 15-year-old year for everybody that they're not a part of your system, right? Potentially at that year. Do you just allow like that system to take in, or do you get involved in it somehow, depending on where they're at, as far as, maybe a strength program for them or a training program or maybe some type of skill development package?
Well, we give them kind of starts at training camp when we do our exit meetings with our players, and even the ones that are signed that are going to play some exhibition games. When we send them back, we give them a little bit of feedback. This is what we'd like to see you work on. These are some things. This is what your strengths are. So make sure you master that. Here's some areas that you can improve on. For the most part, like we'll get some parents that will call and say, "Hey, we have 2 options here. We can play for this program, or we can play for that program. What are your thoughts?" I don't really like to say this is where you need to play. I don't think that's right. I think at the end of the day, we're going to support the player and the family wherever they're going to play. Now, if they're asking for advice, if we know the program, say, this is where I think this program's strong at, and this is where I think this program's strong at. wherever you want to go, that's great. I think ultimately it's probably a little bit about your opportunity. You want to go somewhere where you're going to get opportunity and you want to earn it. But at the same time, if you're going to be a key contributor to that team, you're going to get some power play time, some penalty kill time, especially a player that's signed with us that's going to help fast track their development, get them ready. And, there's a lot of organizations around Western Canada that are really good now, same in the US. And a lot of these coaches are pretty good, especially with this age group. So I feel pretty confident wherever our players are going to be. And ultimately, it's our responsibility to check in. So then during the season, as much as we are focused on the draft itself, we also have a mindset. We got to make sure that we're following up with our prospects just to see how they're doing. And I try to go in and see our guys when I can, especially our signed players, just to kind of check in on them. I certainly touch base with the coaches to see, how they're doing, but at the same time, also support their organization. If sometimes they might say, hey, you know what, can you give this player a call and, just kind of check in with them and stuff like that. So, we're invested in that player, like with their education, their commitment. We want to make sure that we're assisting them with support so that when they come in and when we go all the way back to what we first talked about, confidence, I want to make sure they're coming in at 16 or 17 with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. The draft itself, if we could just touch on that and maybe just for the listeners, and for me too, because I'm not 100% sure on how it all works, but I know that there is a U.S. priority draft, or I'm not sure if I have the name right, where it's just dedicated to U.S. players, and you got another good player there, I believe in Gillespie. You got the first overall, I think, out of rank, and then there's also though U.S. players taken in the regular draft. I saw that as well. Can you explain the difference to me and how that sets up?
Yeah, so you're right. It's the U.S. priority draft, so that's the day before. It used to be called the Bantam draft. Now it's called the prospects draft. But so the U.S. priority draft, it's 2 rounds. So there's 44 players that are taken. Any player that was not taken in that draft, they roll over into the prospects draft, which is the following day. So it allows just the focus of the first 2 rounds for the U.S. draft, and then anybody that's kind of carried over, they can get selected. And we did that. We selected 2 players, and then we also we looked at a player in the regular draft as well.
Gotcha. Can you share what the philosophy of that is? Like, why don't they just have them all in one draft?
I think just have a little bit of focus with the U.S. I mean, obviously, I think it's pretty much well known. You've got the CHL, and then you have the NCAA, and I think it allows teams to really focus. Like you get 2 spots initially; those 2 spots don't even impact your 50-player list. So it allows everyone to get a chance to select a player. And we're starting to see a little bit more of the Americans that are signing. Like so far, I think there's been 4 or 5 of the Americans from that draft in May, just that U.S. draft, that have already committed to the Western League teams. So I think they're just trying so that there's a focus there, rather than when you go into the prospects draft, you have to almost gauge, like, we really like this player, but his commitment level might be low. So do we take him in the 3rd round, or do we wait till the 6th or the 7th round? But in the U.S. priority draft, they give you 2 extra spots. So hopefully for our league, that enables teams to try to select guys who they believe are the high-end players, and then try to recruit them, rather than maybe they don't take a player in the prospects draft because there's a lot of the Canadian players still available.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Yeah. I guess that's a very real concern, and I know that's why it's probably one of the higher questions on the scouting forums or the recruitment forums is, do you want to play in the WHL, right? Because you don't want to be squandering these picks that are so important on players that don't have any intention of being there. How do you assess that? Because people could be holding their cards tight. Who knows where parents are at and where the players are at. But I assume, especially with your earlier picks, like you need to know that they are willing to come.
Yeah, you want to have a pretty good idea. We believe, my philosophy is, even if a family or a player says, we're not really interested, that's not going to determine whether we draft a player. What it may determine is where we draft that player. So Dan, you are correct. Like in the early rounds, we certainly need to know, but we're not going to take a player that we really, really like just because they say they're not really interested. It just determines where we take that player. And that's part of our job is on the recruiting side to provide a plan for them. I when it comes to signing players, if we're doing a recruiting, I try to put together a development plan that's just not coming in and just being general, say, we're going to try to develop you into an NHL player. We try to put together a plan that has year 1 at 16. This is what this looks like. This is what year 2 looks like. This is what year 3 looks like. And so it they get a bit of a layout of what it's going to be. If we're honest, the USA Hockey's done a real good job over the years. NCAA hockey is certainly big. I think the biggest thing is where players are going to go until they get into NCAA hockey to maintain their eligibility. So you obviously in Canada, you've got the BCHL and the Alberta Junior League and so on. And certainly in the U.S., the USHL is the main prominent junior A league that enables players to maintain their eligibility until they go in the NCAA. So there's basically 2 routes to try to meet your goal, and we always sell it on why we think our route's good. There's been some players in the past, Jason, that and I really, really appreciate how they approach it, and they'll just say, Matt, my goal is to play hockey at an NCAA university. If it doesn't work out in the end, if I'm not a pro, then that's fine. But I've always had a goal. And when players say that or families say that, it's like, you know what, I get it. That's great. But when they come back and say, well, we're going to go this route because we think this is our better chance for the NHL, well, then that's where I feel that we can say, well, this is why we think our route's good, or why Spokane is good, why we can do this. We make a really known within an organization, we're never going to negative recruit. We're not going to say anything negative to try to get a player to come to us. Our main focus is why we feel we're a very good option, for your son and stuff like that. So that's something we try to maintain at a high level. So.
Oh, that's great. And I think that the university system there in Canada, like the hockey system, is becoming much more relevant and credible to producing pro players. And I'm not sure why it wasn't historically either, but that they're coming into relevance for sure. So the fact that the schooling is paid for, up at a Canadian institution, and the hockey still is very good there, and it's still a route to being a pro. I think that really helps as well. As far as from the recruitment process is concerned. Well,
I agree with you, Jason, and we certainly have to make sure that we continue to send that message. For whatever reason, there's this mindset that if you go to Canadian university, then the dream is over, and that's not the case. It's different. Major junior comes, and then you go college, where maybe it's different. It's flipped, where if you go in the NCAA, most of the players are going in a little bit. They can go in as early as 18. Most are probably 19. Well, Canadian university, it's probably 21. So it's just, you're still achieving the same thing if you're going that direction. And you are right. Like one of our own, Derek Ryan, who's from Spokane, played in Spokane, and he's a great testament to how his path. And it goes back to, there's a numerous paths to get to the NHL. And he took a road that was, a bit unique, but I think it's really important that people understand that it can happen, and talk about perseverance and confidence in himself to do that. So
one of my favorite interviews, he was on the program, and he was one of the guys that I didn't know. I never played with him, right? I didn't know him at all. Reached out to him over social media. He was kind enough to come on, and what an amazing story. And it was awesome to celebrate and to have him tell it. I didn't know half of it, then the fact that he's still in the NHL now is remarkable. So if anyone out there hasn't listened to that interview, I highly recommend it, because he was one of the first, essentially kind of a trailblazer, not directly from Canadian University to the NHL, to an NHL contract. It took a longer road, but still there is definitely more guys signing NHL deals out of that league now. So I think that's helpful for the recruitment process at WHL. I know we're right up here against the clock. The last question, and I always I want to end with this just because, and maybe I'll put you on the spot, maybe not, I don't know, but like the idea of not getting drafted as a 14-year-old and that this dream is not done, that I think the stats historically say like roughly 30 to 35% of the league is undrafted players that are consistent in the WHL. And so, just to keep the spirits up, and it is one day in time. Like, do you know offhand how many players on the Spokane Chiefs from last year's roster weren't drafted?
Yeah, I should know that. I don't know if I can give you a firm answer on that, but you are correct. I mean, there's more and more players that are coming into the league that weren't drafted. And we talk about the draft is certainly the lifeline to your team, but it just doesn't stop there. And over my time in Portland and then my 3 years in Kamloops and now in Spokane, I mean, probably at least 30%, maybe even 40% are going to be, your roster is going to be made up of players that weren't drafted, and the draft is just the first opportunity. It gives you the first opportunity that you are going to a camp. I mean, every year at our camp, we have anywhere from 3 to 5 players that are invites that wind up making our list. So I think invites that come to camp, their main focus should be coming in. Hey, I'm going to try to make this list. That should be the focus. Come in. You've got 4 days to make an impression. But every year we have 3 to 5 that make our list. Now, do those players ever make our team? Not sure. But just like some of our drafted players may not play, whether it's their development, maybe it's just opportunity that's available to them. Like maybe we just don't have room, so to speak, in their age group. But I think it is important, Jason, for that message that if you're not drafted, that's not the end. And it's no different than the NHL. I mean, we see guys that don't get drafted that wind up signing free agent contracts and playing the NHL, or guys that get drafted in the first round of the NHL and maybe never play. Those things just happen. So, but yeah, I think it's important, especially at the Western level, because it is tough. I mean, we are drafting 14-year-olds. I mean, are they physically ready? Are they emotionally ready? It's just there's so many variables when you're talking about a 14-year-old, and where he's going to be even in 2 years. Some of those players all of a sudden physically hit a growth spurt. They grow 6-7 inches, and all of a sudden they start to catch up with other guys that were drafted. And you're like, oh. That's where I think it's important that the evaluation process never stops for us, whether you're 14 or whether you're 17 or 18, it never stops.
Yeah, no, I just like getting that message out because it is just one moment in time. And it's all about like falling in love with the process, as you said earlier, as a player. And that's the one thing that I try and get my own boys to buy into. And anyone that that I work with is, it's about you getting better. And whether you got drafted 3rd overall, like Mathis Preston, like, he needs to get better too. And the guy you drafted in the 7th round needs to get better. He might need to get better faster, right? He's got to understand that, there was like 6 rounds of players that people thought were better than me. So there's obviously a gap I need to close. So maybe there's a little more urgency in his game, but Mathis cannot be comfortable where he's at. I mean, and that's just whether you're player A or player Z, you got to fall in love with that art of getting better. Because you're always trying to get there, and there's always guys that are going to come up from behind that are doing the work that maybe you're not. So I like that message, and there's lots of guys that play in the league that have never been drafted. So appreciate you saying that. I think that's a good way for us to leave this one. I know you got a meeting coming up. So Matt, thanks so much for spending the hour with us here and with my listeners and sharing a little insight into what the Spokane Chiefs are and what you're about and what it's like to be a WHL player. And I know we're a lot more knowledgeable because of it.
Well, I really appreciate it, Jason. I appreciate you having me on. I know you're a proud alum, and it's always exciting to talk to anybody that's been through the organization. And hopefully this year, when we're coming up, when we're in Kelowna or Kamloops, I know Kamloops, which one's closer for you, but maybe I'll reach out to you and maybe you can pop on out and we can connect in person.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I would love it. I did see a game last year, and the boys are at the perfect age where they like to go watch too. So if the schedules don't collide, it's tough sometimes with how busy they all are, but it's nice to get them out and watch the WHL hockey, especially with that Spokane Chief logo ripping around the ice. So yeah, thanks so much. And,
for sure. Well, I'm sure I'll see you around the rinks too with your boy up in his draft here, right? So we'll be talking quite a bit. So
all right. Cheers, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of my conversation with Matt. That was a lot of fun for me to be able to sit here with the general manager of the Spokane Chiefs, someplace that I played for 4 years. Like those are really, really formidable years. You know, the late teen years. It's where like your music tastes come from. I remember books from that time. I remember like so many friendships that I still have to date. I visited my billets the other day when I was down in Spokane on a vacation and got to see them. And yeah, it was a really special interview for me and for Matt to come in there now and to take ownership and to take the reins of that organization and to get it into a better place in a win-loss column, as last year wasn't, you know, and the year before it hasn't been some great years of recent for the Spokane Chiefs, but I know it's in very good hands, as we just heard there with what they have going on there. I love the plan that they have in place. I love the players that they were drafted, that they want to be Spokane Chiefs in the future, and there's some really good core pieces that they have to work with this year. And by all accounts, it sounds like the coaching staff has been doing a great job there. So thank you for being here, and for anyone who's a Spokane Chief who may be listening to this, or a Spokane Chief fan that's a part of that community and is maybe listening to this as a current fan and maybe never had a chance to watch me play. I just want to say thank you to that whole city, the organization, the Bretts, Tim Speltz when he was there, all the coaches that I played for, Brian Maxwell and Mike Babcock and Perry Shockey and Mr. Braun, and I know I'm missing some people, but there was every person there had an impact on me and on my journey, and I just want to thank you for that, because it was a special time, and I hope that anyone here who is maybe wanting to play in the WHL gets to go to a great organization and have it be as impactful for them as it was for me. So I know a lot of people are trying to make a decision out there. I am definitely not pro WHL. You have to go WHL or the OHL or the QMJHL. You don't have to play Canadian major junior hockey, but it was a special piece for me. I think it is a very good league. I think it's a very great development league. I think it teaches you how to be a pro. I think there's a ton of accountability within the system. You know, the ownership that you have to have as a student athlete in a WHL environment, like, it teaches you how to grow up, and it teaches you a level of maturity that otherwise you don't have. The road trips, the length of the bus rides, the amount of games you have to play, the amount of practices you have, that you have to show up and get your school done. That's such a priority. You know, there's tons of things there that are just part of the ecosystem that make you grow up as a person and as a player. And I know there's massive benefits of the NCAA route and those that go to play Junior A. And I'm working with the Salmon Arm Silverbacks in their mental performance capacity, and I see the big goals and the big dreams there, and the level of skill that's in that league, and many of those players move on to the NCAA and have great pro careers after that and continue their education in the States. So there's definitely not a right way. I definitely don't think there is a one way for anyone. I think everyone has their own path, and whatever you are drawn to is going to be where you want to go. But I do know that WHL is a heck of a hockey league, and there's a lot of good players there. And for those of you who want to play in the WHL, go chase it big, cherish every game that you get, and recognize that you're amongst some of the best players of your age group, and it is a great place to improve if you're willing to put in the work. So thank you again to Matt Bardsley and everyone else who's listening. Until next time, play hard and keep your head up.